You ever hear one of those stories where you just want to slap your forehead and say, "Are you kidding me?" Well, let me tell you nothing, and I mean nothing, tops what my HOA managed to pull off. I've heard plenty of horror stories about people getting fined over the color of their mailbox or being forced to cut their grass with scissors. But what happened to me? It wasn't just ridiculous. It was a masterclass in stupidity and arrogance, and honestly, it still blows my mind every time I think about it. You want a lesson in how to destroy paradise in the name of progress? Buckle up, because this one's a ride. So here's the setup. About a decade back, I stumbled across a little slice of heaven at the far end of a brand new suburb called Willow Creek Estates. Funny name, actually. There wasn't much of a creek left once the developers had finished piping everything underground so they could squeeze in a few more houses. My place was different, though. I snagged a 5-acre plot, hugging the very edge of the neighborhood, surrounded on 3 sides by old-growth woods, and on the 4th well, that was the real prize. A 2-acre spring-fed lake, crystal clear and deep as a secret, ringed by maples and oaks that had been there longer than the state highway. I'd fish from my little dock in the evenings sometimes, just sit there feeling the world slow down, watching the sky turn pink and gold over the water. Now, I knew there was an HOA. I wasn't living under a rock. But my property wasn't part of their original subdivision plat. Their pool didn't care about their plastic playgrounds, and frankly, the idea of someone telling me what color my door could be made my skin crawl. So I kept to myself, fixed up the old house, planted wildflowers, and figured they'd do the same. That right there was mistake number 1. It didn't take long for the first shot to be fired. Gerald Henderson, king of the HOA, showed up in my life by way of a stiff little letter complaining about the wild milkweed I'd let grow along the fence near their common space. I was trying to help the monarch butterflies, but you'd have thought I was growing poison ivy. I sent back a polite note, explained my reasons, even attached a picture of the butterflies. Henderson never cared about that. He was the kind of guy who measured self-worth by how white his golf shirt was and how close he could park his Escalade to the front door. After that, it was a slow drip. Complaints about excess frog noise, warnings about my compost pile, side eyes over anything that didn't look like it belonged in a glossy brochure. Each time I'd check the county ordinances, respond politely, and move on. It seemed to drive him nuts that I wouldn't just roll over. I became the nail he needed to hammer, and brother, he brought a whole toolbox. But here's where things get spicy. About 2 years ago, word started floating around about a supposed flood risk from my lake. No joke. Suddenly, this little patch of water that had survived storms and droughts since Teddy Roosevelt was in office was now, according to some expert hired by the HOA, an imminent disaster waiting to happen. The solution: drain the lake, bulldoze the area flat, and wait for it put in a parking lot. Nothing says progress like tearing out a 100-year-old ecosystem to make room for a few more oversized SUVs, right? If you think I'm exaggerating, let me paint you a picture. They sent me a report, pages of technical jargon, all smoke and mirrors, blaming my lake for every puddle in the neighborhood. Their evidence included grainy photos after a rare downpour and a few charts pulled out of thin air. The recommendation was to drain the lake immediately and repurpose the land. It was a joke, and as a civil engineer, specifically a hydrologist, it offended me to my core. I put together a counter report with real data, rainfall records, geological maps, the whole 9 yards, showing that the lake was actually protecting their homes from flooding, not causing it. But Henderson didn't care. He waved off my evidence, and the board, just a flock of nodding heads, voted to go ahead anyway. I tried everything. Hired a lawyer, argued at meetings, showed up with charts and graphs and a binder full of facts. It didn't matter. Henderson had whipped up the community, told them I was selfish for hoarding land when people needed more parking. He started calling it Henderson Plaza before a single tree was cut down. And all the while, I'm standing there feeling like I'm shouting into a void. Then came D-Day. The machinery rolled up one morning, excavators, dump trucks, miles of black pipe. They set up pumps, and by noon, the water in my lake was dropping by the hour. Fish flopped helplessly in shrinking puddles. Birds circled overhead in confusion, and Henderson just watched from the comfort of his Escalade, sipping a coffee with that self-satisfied grin. The whole thing was like a slow-motion punch to the gut. When the water was gone, the bulldozers moved in. Trees I'd grown to love gone in hours. The rich black soil was scraped away, dumped, and replaced by gravel, and finally the asphalt. That spot that used to be a living, breathing corner of the world became a sweltering, soulless parking lot hot enough to fry an egg. You know, I thought I'd be broken after that. For a while I was. I avoided everyone, barely left the house. Every morning I looked out at that black scar and felt the loss all over again. But then something inside me hardened. I realized Henderson and his crew had made a fatal mistake they'd forgotten, that water doesn't just disappear when you tell it to. It always finds a way. So I got to work not with sabotage, but with science. See, when you pave over a natural lake, the water that used to seep gently into the earth has to go somewhere else. And that big old parking lot, turns out it funneled every drop of rain straight to the lowest point right where the neighborhood dipped down. Henderson's house and a few other loyal board members sat smack in the crosshairs. I started by clearing out the old swales on my land, just natural little channels, barely noticeable but perfect for moving water along. I built rain gardens, filled them with tough native plants that could soak up a storm, but I made sure their capacity was just enough for a regular rain. When the big storms rolled through, and they always do in this part of the country, those gardens would overflow, and the water, having nowhere else to go, followed the swales right toward the new lowest points. That first fall, people started noticing dampness in their basements. Henderson's best friend Peterson found puddles under his workshop after a rain, and Henderson, of course, blamed old pipes and neglected maintenance. By the next spring, it was getting worse. Lawns turned into squishy bogs, driveways cracked, and mold crept up basement walls all over the place. Even Henderson's prized rose bushes gave up, turning yellow and limp. Meanwhile, the parking lot started showing its own problems: standing water-cracked asphalt and a mosquito population that could carry off a small dog. The HOA tried everything, called in new experts, held panicked meetings, even tried to blame unprecedented weather patterns. But the truth was written in every water stain and mildew smell. The new consultants admitted it: the removal of the lake had wrecked the local hydrology. Fixing it would mean regrading the land, digging expensive drainage systems, and for homeowners, installing heavy-duty sump pumps at their own cost. The board was forced to approve massive special assessments. Folks were furious at Henderson, at the board, at everyone involved. The final blow: Henderson, king of the HOA, had to resign, citing health reasons. His basement was basically a swimming pool, his roses dead, his reputation in tatters. He sold his house for a fraction of what it was worth and moved out of state. As for me, I couldn't bring my lake back, but I turned my side of the old basin into a chain of wetlands full of frogs and dragonflies again. My house stayed dry, my gardens thrived, and every time I looked out at that parking lot, half flooded, dotted with abandoned cars, I smiled a little. Nature doesn't care about your bylaws or your power trips. Water remembers. And in the end, it always wins. So tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? Ever have an HOA pull something like this on you? Drop your stories down below, because I've got a feeling I'm not alone here. Sometimes the best revenge really is just letting nature take the wheel.